In this video, I want to talk about CULTS. I've spoken about CULTS before in many previous videos. In this video, I want to highlight that people do not join cults because they are dumb or because they lack intellectual capacities. That is what a lot of people think, that those that join cults, they're not intelligent, or they have mental defects, or that they're just plain stupid people that can't think clearly. That is a stigma that's used on members of cults. I'm here to tell you that often the exact opposite is true. People that join cults don't literally join cults. They may sign up for a group, they may begin to attend a group, but it doesn't mean they join a cult. Because a cult is not something you join on purpose, unless you want to join the shadow government because you're desperately wicked and you want to be a wizard or whatever. But in general, 99.99% of the time, when people enter cults, they don't join on purpose. They join a charity organization, not aware it's a cult. Because the moment they realize it's a cult, they want to get out. And if any of them would have noticed from the beginning that it's a cult, they would have avoided it. First of all, what is a cult? There are many ways to explain it, but I'm going to keep it very simple here. A cult is when a group of people come together to avoid discomforts of life. That's not the definition, it's just the beginning of the definition. So you have a group of people that want to avoid discomforts of life, things as loneliness, things as frustration or disagreements, arguments, just want to avoid discomfort. And in this avoidance, they cling to each other for comfort. And this comfort implies that they all have strong agreements that binds them together. So what they have in common are strong agreements. So in other words, a cult is a group of people united by strong agreements against something because they are in avoidance. That's what a cult is. That's it. That's what a cult is. And a sect is when you have a part of a movement that deviates from the mainstream goals of that movement. For example, you can have a civil rights movement for blacks, and then you have this branch of that movement that turns violent, calling itself Black Lives Matter. So that is a sect. So a sect is a cult that came into being by people revolting against a mainstream movement. That's what a sect is. And a cult in itself, I just explained it. Group of people who have strong agreements in common, and because they want to cling on to these strong agreements, they avoid everything that violates those agreements. That's what a cult is. So now that you know what a cult is, you understand now why it isn't just the weak-minded that fall for cults. Because a cult is not something you join on purpose. Unless you are a devil worshipper and you are greedy for power. But common people and even believers, because there are even believers that fall for cults, they don't join cults. They join something that's a cult, but they're not aware it's a cult. Take, for example, those mega churches. Those mega churches have money behind them. They have prosperity over there. And it's the prosperity that attracts people. Christ said, I came so that they, that's us, will have life and life more abundantly. So prosperity is an outworking of the gospel. However, at the moment, you have many believers who don't operate in prosperity because they're not renewed in their mind. So they're stuck in pagan Christianity. So the leaders of pagan Christianity, who are the wizards, or you can call them the Illuminati, or however you want to call them, they create a branch within pagan Christianity where you have those pagan teachers who are hired by them will preach counterfeit prosperity as the real gospel. So the people that see those mega preachers, they see the prosperity, they see the name of Christ associated with the prosperity, so they think, finally there are believers who walk in prosperity, who aren't stuck with the patterns and abuse of the world. So those believers are attracted to those teachers and preachers because they see the prosperity. Because those believers, when they read the Bible, they read that Christ came to give us life and life more abundantly, but they don't experience it more abundantly themselves. So when they see someone who has it, and that individual is promoted, they think, that's from God. They don't look at the bigger picture. So when they join one of those mega churches, they're there to join a movement of God. At least that's their motivation, and that's a pure motivation on their part. They have no evil intentions. However, they are deceived because they think that they are joining and partaking in a movement that comes from the Holy Spirit, but that's not true. It's familiar spirits that promote that false teacher. And because the name of Christ and Scripture is associated with the prosperity, they think it must be from God. So they join what they think is a movement of God, but it's not a movement of God. It's only after they're in the movement and they're deformed mentally by the movement that they begin to realize that something is wrong. So even believers can be sucked into cults. Because that's how it works. Cults, at least the cult leaders, they use black magic to pull people in. And they do it very well. Whether it's a cult that comes in the name of Christ, or it's a cult that only uses names of Greek gods, or whether it's some lifestyle guru or business guru that comes up, every cult has one thing in common. There's a strong masculine leader, because that works well on the psyche of the population that makes up the cult. You have a strong masculine leader, and you have associates of that strong masculine leader who know the game, who know that it's a scam, but they get along with the scam for financial and social benefits, and in many cases also sexual benefits, because misuse of sexuality is one of the core elements of any cult. So, if you have a cult where they worship a mother goddess, you may think, Rashid, how can this be a cult? Because where's the strong masculine leader? Well, it's not the goddess that's the leader. The goddess is the imagery they use to attract you. In fact, there is some teacher or preacher who is a strong masculine figure that demons use. So you see the strong masculine figure, but you don't see the demons behind that figure. So it's that masculine figure that works psychologically on the masses. So that's what it is with a cult. You have the warlocks who lead it. You have the warlock associates who are also warlocks who assist it. You have the witches who are also aware that it's a scam. And you have the evil spirits that back it up. And then you have the masses that are sucked into the lie. And from the masses, you have some of them who believe in the hoax. They're not aware it's a hoax, but they really believe in the false narratives, and they are the fanatic ones that keep the other cult members in check. That's how a cult operates. And I mentioned before, a cult is when people have strong agreements. And why do they have strong agreements? Because there's something they're avoiding. Now, every human being has something they want to avoid. Whether it's just that you want to avoid getting burned at the stove, well, that is a legitimate avoidance. You don't want your hands to burn at the stove, so you deal with the stove carefully. Or it can be that you don't want to get involved in car accidents. That's why you look thrice around you before you cross the road. So there are things you legitimately want to avoid. There's nothing wrong with that. For example, if you have a parent that's narcissistic, you want to avoid that parent because you don't want any unnecessary drama, because you don't want your mental health to be affected by those toxic people. That's legitimate avoidance. So legitimate avoidance is correct. You should want to avoid danger or anything that leads to danger. That's correct. There's nothing wrong with it. Just understand the following. Even if your avoidance is legitimate, if you don't watch out and you only focus on avoiding, you are distracted already. And while you're distracted, you become an easy prey for cults. People that avoid things illegitimately because they just don't want to face anything, they fall for cults anyway because they are illegitimate in their thinking. They just don't want to face anything in life. So their avoidance is illegitimate. But whether someone's avoidance is illegitimate or legitimate, it doesn't matter. If you're only focused on avoiding, so when you're fleeing, you'll eventually hit a wall. And so when you hit the wall, that you're wounded, emotionally, mentally, or physically, it's now that you're extra vulnerable for cults to suck you in. Let me give a short parable. Let's say you have a 15-year-old girl, or she's a 15-year-old woman, she's a teenager, and she is from a broken household where the parents can't communicate with one another, and the relatives are filled with conflicts. So she wants to get away from all of that. But because she grew up with them, she also developed toxic patterns in her thinking. And now she's too frightened to admit that she has toxic patterns. But the more she denies it, the stronger those patterns become in her character. So she is becoming toxic without realizing it because she keeps fleeing. So anytime she's in a friendship or in a relationship with a guy and there are arguments, she flees. She always flees. One day, she's about to lose her job because she can't handle criticism at work. And it's at that moment that she encountered some women of the same age, that's in her early 20s, that identified with her. And they tell her, there is this woman who teaches us how to start your own business, how to be successful as a independent woman. She's not one of those hardcore feminists that hates men. She's even married, but just come and listen to her once. So this a young woman who was 15 and now she's 23, she decides, you know what, let me just go for once. And she goes there. She is received well. The female guru, or quote unquote female guru, is really a tranny, but they think it's a female. That tranny is a strong male figure of the cult, but because it's a tranny, they think it's a woman. So the tranny greets her, she feels welcome, and she goes for a while. She doesn't have to sign up to become a member. She doesn't have to pay any contribution. It's just for free. You come and you listen to her lectures. She doesn't charge you anything. She does it a few times, and eventually she began to practice what was taught onto her, and it works. So eventually she leaves her job. And now the people at that group, those other women, become her support group. It's only later, when she approaches 30, she just got married, her business is going well, that she realizes that the only people she is around are people from that group. And she realizes that the charismatic leader of the group is quite controlling, and that she acts quite manly. She didn't realize yet that it's a tranny, that it's all a scam. So what happened here? She was fleeing. Now, it's one thing to flee from toxic people if they're really after you. That's one thing. But to not want to face internal things that need to be resolved inside of you, that's illegitimate fleeing. So she was both fleeing legitimately as well as illegitimately. That led to her ending in a crisis. She hit the wall. And it was at this time that demons noticed, Lisa hit the wall? Okay, send quickly people from that feminist cult. And that's how she was drawn into a cult. She went to the meetings because she wanted empowerment. So she chose empowerment, thinking that it would benefit her. She didn't join a cult. That was not her motivation. Eventually, that is what happened, that she became part of a cult, but from her side, from her motivation, it wasn't a cult she wanted to join, but she just wanted to get empowerment. And that is how it goes. So when you see someone that's part of a cult, don't be quick to look down on them. Don't look down on them anyway. We as believers, we shouldn't look down on anyone. Just know that whoever is part of a cult, unless they are the leaders of the cult who are aware of the scam and they're just the perpetrators, if they're not the perpetrators who lead the cult, they are people who are either deeply wounded or they are trapped by avoidance. One of the two. So they're not there because they want to be controlled, but eventually they end up being controlled without them being aware of it. You can have PhDs. You can have master degrees. You can have honors degrees. It doesn't matter how intelligent you are or how high your IQ is. Anyone can be sucked into a cult if they're not aware. The moment you are aware of how cults operate, and the moment you are self-aware of your fleeing, the moment you become aware that you're fleeing from something, you realize, okay, this fleeing needs to stop, I need to address things. The moment you begin to address things internally, you are less likely to be sucked into a cult. Because worldly people in general don't want to face things because they just want to flee, it's the norm for worldly people to be part of a cult. Rarely will you find anyone outside of Christ who's not part of a cult. There are even many people in Christ that are trapped in cults and are not even aware of it. So those outside of Christ, most of them are part of some kind of coalition. They are part of some kind of cult. And again, a cult doesn't have to be the KKK or the Nazis or neo-Nazis. It doesn't have to be something that's obviously dangerous. A cult can also be that people want to fight climate change, that they want to save the environment, or it can be that you have compassionate people that are concerned with the safety of children. So you can have people that have good motives, they have good intentions, they have, let's say, their heart is in the right place, but if they don't look at the bigger picture, they can be trapped in cults and abuse, because that's the purpose of a cult, to use you as food for demons. So a cult is something paranormal. That's why those that rule over people in cults, because in a cult you're ruled over by the cult leaders. That's why those that run cults, they rule over people by keeping them in a state of anxiety, whether that anxiety is overt or covert. Covert works longer, while overt anxiety lasts only for a while. All those that run cults make use of paranormal aids, because a cult is a paranormal construction. Society in itself is a cult, but because this cult is a bit loose, you don't realize immediately that it's a cult. So, most people that walk the earth today are part of some cult. Some grow up in cults. Some are born into cults. They're not even aware that they're in a cult. There aren't that many people that are free from cults. Being part of a cult or multiple cults is the norm in the world. Always has been. So, do not make it your life purpose to avoid cults, because then you are in fleeing. And by being in fleeing, you are not walking by faith. So by going into the flee mode, by remaining in this survival mode, that's what the flee mode is, in the survival mode. By remaining in the survival mode, you are in darkness. So don't do that. Acknowledge that cults exist, acknowledge how they operate, and acknowledge why people are part of cults. You You have people that are anointed. They're born again and anointed, but they're trapped in cults still. That's why it's important to renew your mind. That's why I keep making these videos, to teach you. I'm feeding Christ's lambs. That's what I'm doing. Christ said to Peter, if you love me, feed my lambs. And that's what I'm doing. I agree with Christ.